During the height of the Cold War, when nuclear fear gripped every nation and backyard shelters became a quiet obsession, engineers and survivalists weren't just thinking about how to hide from the blast. They were thinking about how to endure after it. Governments built massive bunkers, but ordinary people, armed with nothing more than practical know-how and sheer determination, discovered something far more enduring. A simple shelter trick that could outlast concrete, metal, and even time itself. It wasn't high-tech or expensive, it was born from resourcefulness and science. And here's the surprising part. That same technique is still one of the most reliable low-cost methods of protecting yourself from radiation, extreme weather, and collapse scenarios today. In this episode, we're digging deep into the forgotten Cold War shelter trick that truly stood the test of time, and how you can still apply it right now for survival, protection, and long-term resilience. The Cold War sparked a new era of underground ingenuity. After World War II, the arms race turned invisible. It wasn't about soldiers and tanks anymore, it was about who could survive the fallout. As governments distributed manuals on how to build fallout shelters, millions of citizens started experimenting. But what most didn't realize was that the strongest shelters weren't the ones built with the thickest concrete. They were the ones designed to work with nature, not against it. Across the United States, Britain, and parts of Eastern Europe, a quiet discovery emerged: earth berming, the practice of using packed soil as both structure and insulation. Instead of building above the ground and piling materials on top, Cold War survivalists began to carve into hillsides, using layers of earth to absorb radiation, stabilize temperature, and provide near-indestructible structural support. Soil, it turned out, could block more radiation per inch than most available building materials. And this wasn't theoretical. It was tested. U.S. civil defense agencies in the 1950s conducted experiments showing that just 3 feet of packed earth could reduce radiation exposure by over 90%. That made it the ultimate poor man's concrete. More importantly, it made survival achievable without industrial resources, something that remains true for off-grid builders today. The brilliance of the earth berm design lay in its simplicity. Instead of trying to resist external forces like heat, cold, or blast shock, the shelter used the Earth's natural density to absorb and dissipate them. This approach meant that a properly constructed berm-edge shelter maintained steady temperatures year-round, cool in summer, warm in winter, and nearly silent during storms. In practical terms, the Cold War engineers realized that survival wasn't about hiding underground. It was about living with the ground. They built semi-subterranean shelters with one exposed side for entry and ventilation, while the rest was buried under compacted soil. This method balanced safety with breathability. Modern preppers can apply this concept even without a hillside. Start by digging into the ground at least 4 feet, constructing a low frame from wood or concrete block, and then backfilling around the sides with compacted soil. Leave only the entrance and ventilation shafts exposed. If you're building in a backyard or rural area, this design can be replicated for storm shelters, root cellars, or even off-grid cabins. The Earth's thermal mass will keep it naturally stable. No expensive insulation required. One of the most overlooked survival lessons from the Cold War was ventilation. People thought thick walls were the key to safety, but, many early shelters failed simply because they lacked air circulation. The breakthrough came with the Kearney air pump, a simple hand-powered fan system made from plywood and plastic sheeting that used pressure differences to move fresh air without electricity. This was the trick that allowed underground shelters to be self-sustaining. Instead of suffocating behind sealed walls, survivors could manually pump air using lightweight materials anyone could construct. The genius of the Kearney system was that it didn't depend on fuel, motors, or external power, just physics and manpower. For today's survivalist, that principle still applies. Whether you're building a storm shelter, off-grid root cellar, or underground storage, you must design for airflow. A basic setup includes an intake vent at ground level and an exhaust vent several feet higher on the opposite side. Even without fans, natural convection will keep air moving. For emergencies, having a manual air pump or collapsible duct system, just like the Cold War pioneers used, can make the difference between a functional shelter and a sealed tomb. As materials became scarce and expensive during the mid-century shelter boom, engineers turned to local soil. By mixing clay-heavy earth with small amounts of lime or Portland cement, they created what became known as stabilized earth blocks. These blocks could be molded and sun-dried to form durable, low-cost walls that resisted moisture and fire. You know, this technique, though really refined during the Cold War, actually revived ancient wisdom used in Mesopotamian and Roman architecture. Tests showed that stabilized earth walls, when properly cured and sealed, could last well over a century with just minimal maintenance. Modern homesteaders and preppers can still apply this even today. With just a hand press and some local clay soil, you can create earthen bricks for constructing secondary walls, radiation shielding, or even thermal insulation for an underground structure. Sealed with a lime plaster or a wax mixture, these blocks remain waterproof, breathable, and honestly, surprisingly strong. This was the Cold War's greatest secret. When industrial systems might fail, natural materials used intelligently could endure. The true genius of the Cold War shelter movement wasn't paranoia. It was, in fact, sustainability. Most designs relied on passive heating and cooling, gravity-fed ventilation, and recycled water systems. These shelters could remain habitable for months without any resupply. Today, that same thinking forms the backbone of modern eco-building. Earthships, rammed earth homes, and underground greenhouses all borrowed directly from Cold War-era survival architecture. The idea was never about luxury. It was about independence. A well-designed shelter used the planet's own forces, gravity, temperature, and airflow, to sustain human life with minimal external input. For those building off-grid, this is honestly the model worth revisiting. If you can stabilize your temperature using earth, circulate air without electricity, and store water using gravity-fed systems, well, you've achieved what Cold War survivalists called shelter self-reliance. It's not about hiding from the world, it's about being ready when the world stops working. The Cold War taught an uncomfortable truth. Survival isn't about technology. It's about timeless principles. The humble earth-bermed shelter, perfected in an age of nuclear dread, remains to this day one of the most resilient structures humanity has ever devised. It resists temperature swings, radiation, and natural disasters, all while being cheap, repairable, and sustainable. It's a reminder that in times of uncertainty, simplicity outlasts complexity. You don't need steel walls or million-dollar systems, just a solid understanding of physics, earth, and design. The same principles that protected families 60 years ago can protect us today, whether from storms, grid failure, or worse. If this deep dive into Cold War survival wisdom sparked new respect for the old ways, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning. Share this with fellow history buffs and survivalists who value the lessons written in the dirt and stone of our past. Because while the world has changed, the foundations of endurance have not, and the earth itself still holds the greatest shelter of all.